Welcome, everybody, to this edition of The Kingdom and Its Stories. We're delighted to have you with us today, whether you're listening and viewing. Uh, we have a very special guest with us today, JoJo Ruba, and he's all the way from the distant land of Canada. But JoJo, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Glad
And
to
I
be here,
just
Bob.
want to remind our viewers that and listeners that the purpose of this broadcast is not to highlight the individual we're interviewing, but to allow their testimony of how God has worked in them and through them to inspire those of us who are listening to consider how we might better be Jesus' hands and feet in our environment. Jojo, welcome. We're glad to have you with us today, all the way from the distant land of Canada.
Yes.
And Jojo, in order for our listeners to get a better feeling of who they're listening to, give us the elevator speech. Who is Jojo?
Well, I'm a Canadian Christian apologist. That doesn't mean I apologize a lot like a good Canadian. It just means that we want to be able to give a good reason for the hope that we have, as First Peter 3:15 says. And that reason has to be presented with gentleness and respect. And the key for my ministry is called Redeeming Conversations, is we realized the most important step, often the first step for any Christian ministry, is to begin a conversation, to be willing to have good conversations with people all around us. I grew up in the church. My dad is a pastor. I became a Christian growing up. And part of the beauty of that is that you really appreciate your faith, but also the challenge, especially for those of us who are pastors' kids who grew up in the church, is that often we only end up learning how to talk to other Christians. And I think it's critical for us to realize that God has placed us here on earth so we can begin the conversations with people around us. And in fact, that's how the early church grew, because they were willing to converse with anyone in any marketplace, any place that they can, often off the difficult issues, because the early church was persecuted and they had to be willing to defend and share and love people around them, regardless of the conversation. And so, right now, the biggest issue that we're dealing with is the LGBTQ conversation and teaching Christians how we can better share our faith and the love of Christ to those in that community.
Wow, good summary. So, uh, how did you come into that particular area of dialogue?
Well, quite reluctantly, I was actually leading a Bible study group at my university as part of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And just like many people in university, I was looking for someone maybe to fall in love with, and I was starting to fall in love with a member of that Bible study group. And the problem was it was a men's Bible study group. And I had to face the fact that I was dealing with same-sex sexual attractions, with gay feelings. And so I had a good conversation with the staff worker at IVCF. Thankfully, she gave me a phone number for a Christian counselor who really helped me think through what does it mean to be a Bible believing Christian despite and regardless of all the temptations that we face. And that issue came to a head for me when in my city here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, we were fighting a bylaw that would ban that same Christian counseling that I received. And I'd never shared my testimony publicly. I actually never shared that even with my family, until just a few years ago, I had to publicly share that I went through this counseling to defend that right to get counseling. Unfortunately, in Canada, that kind of counseling that I received is now criminal. And we realize that we actually have to do something as believers to defend not just our right to have a conversation, but our right to believe that God has a better design for sexuality and gender. So I've been doing that now for the last couple of years, teaching and training Christians and churches and Christian schools on how they can navigate this issue.
Wow, do you can you illustrate that with some stories and
Oh,
help us to understand how how that works out?
Absolutely. So a couple of the Christian schools I've been working here in my province, which is like your state, I've we were actually taken over by people claiming to be Christians but were pro LGBTQ and imposing things like rainbow flags and pronouns at a Christian school. And so parents came to me and said, Jojo, how can we take back our schools? How can we push back? And so I've been actually helping these parents and parents at other schools by pointing out there's actually three steps that these kinds of groups, and I call them revisionists because what they do is they try to revise the Bible to make it conform to their view of sexuality and gender, which is always affirming the sexual behavior. And so the three steps are this.
How do they do that?
Well, they come in saying, well, let's just be neutral on the topic because there's good people on both sides of the issue. And we've seen these steps, by the way, with the Methodists, with the Episcopalians in the US. This is the exact same three steps they take to try to push their agenda into different denominations. And I actually help again deal with that in different groups as well. So they come in saying they have to be neutral. And what's important about that is they don't actually defend their revisionism. All they need to say is, well, let's just be neutral about it. And once they have a beachhead, then they convert people to their side, or they fire people who are not willing to conform to their view. And then last step, they actually declare their organization pro-LGBT. So in British Columbia, the province next door, there's actually a network of Christian schools, about 36 of them, that have now openly proclaimed their stance supporting LGBTQ after these three steps were followed in one school and then went into the entire school system. So that's all 36 schools now have this view. Again, that's happened with the Methodists, with the Episcopalians. So these steps are ones we need to be able to address by first of all saying, no, there is no neutral stance. You're either with the Bible or you're not with the Bible. And I say that personally because I had to make that decision too, Bob. I had to decide, is this something I'm going to trust that's good for me? I'm going to trust that God's word is true, or I'm going to decide my own theology. And obviously, I really want Christians to understand that the biblical view of sexuality is good. It's worth trusting. And the second thing, I think this is important too, is that our culture has been teaching us that sexuality or your gendered confusion, your gendered feelings define your identity. And my counselor gave me something really powerful. It gave me a little truth. He said, Jojo, at the end of the day, your sexual feelings are things that you have. They are not things that you are unless you choose to make it your identity. And that's been something so freeing
Wow.
for me. So I can express the fact that I have these struggles, but they don't define who I am. Who defines me is my savior, not my sexuality. And I think that's such a key message that we need to be able to have. Because remember, I think the key thing here is as Christians, we need to engage in the conversation. When we don't share in conversation, when we don't talk about how good the biblical view of sexuality is with our friends and family, what ends up happening is there's a vacuum, and these revisionists fill that vacuum. Whereas we have good news to share, even on this topic, and we really need to be able to bring that good news out. That's why I'm actually writing a book on 5 key assumptions Christians need to overcome when it comes to the LGBTQ conversation. So those are all kinds of
Wow.
conversations that I've had. Let me share one more story, Bob, if I can. I just got an email yesterday, actually. This is brand new. It was from a pastor who'd been asking help for help because someone in the community had actually asked, I sent an email saying, "Hey, I want to send my daughters to your youth group. Are you an affirming church?" And so he asked me to be able to write a little draft email to respond, and I did. And I said, look, you need to say this. We are absolutely an affirming church. We affirm every person and welcome every person to hear the message of Jesus. But when you come here, the message of Jesus is one that we can trust his design for sexuality and gender. So if you want to learn about Jesus with us, you're welcome to come. We're never going to change that. We will be glad to have you join us. And the pastor just emailed me yesterday, and he said that mom actually is bringing her kids to the youth group this Friday because that email was enough to help her understand we're not against anybody, but we are for the gospel.
Wow, Jojo. That insight that your counselor gave you uh, is I think central. Feelings are something you have,
Mhm.
but what you do with it is what defines you.
Right.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's a really good. The 5 points that you mentioned, is that something you can summarize for us?
Sure, absolutely. So the first one is what I said, that identity is a choice. At the end of the day, we decide if we make our feelings our identity. But ultimately, and as Christians, we believe this, we can't escape the identity God gives us. So ultimately, He's the one who decides our identity. The second thing is that we're taught that love is affirmation, that we need to affirm someone in order to love them. But oftentimes we can't do that. In fact, if we truly love someone, we can't affirm what they're doing, what they're saying. It was actually Gandhi who popularized Augustine's quote that we have to hate the sin but love the sinner. I think a better way of saying that is we have to hate the sin because we love the sinner. And that's the second point. The third
Oh, well,
is
yes.
that especially for those children, young adults who struggle with gender confusion, is that male and female are not goals we need to achieve, but gifts God has already given us. And as someone who struggles with
Yeah.
same-sex attraction, I can tell you what I've struggled with is my own identity as masculine. When I realize, no, I don't have to achieve that, that's already something God has given. That's part of my healing process too.
You're already there. Yeah.
The fourth one is that love is love. All love is the same. And C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Four Loves, and he actually says there's four distinct love needs that we have: agape, storge, philia, and eros. And these love needs are critical for human flourishing, but they're not interchangeable. It's the same reason why you should not raise your child as your best friend, because if you do that, you're going to raise a tyrant, right? Because they need you to be mom and dad. In the same way, homosexuality is trying to meet one love need, which is the need for same-sex intimacy, and confusing it with another love need, which is eros love, which is oppositeness love. And you can't have sameness love and opposite love in the same breath. And the last one is what I mentioned first, but we have to stop apologizing for the gospel. The gospel is good news for everybody. And we need to start acting like it's good news. And that means not saying, oh, I'm sorry that we have to oppose your sexual behavior or practice. No, it's because we love you. We have to say no to that kind of behavior.
Wow. I have you written a book about, you're writing a book about this?
It will be done by the end of the year, so I'd love to share that with you when it's done.
Yeah. Well, w is there something our listeners can write down now,
Well,
that would give them a way to find out, when this is ready?
yeah, join our website mailing list on redeemingconversations.ca. We have some great interviews there. I've interviewed Sean McDowell, the Christian apologist, just a few months ago, as well as tips, conversations. We have some readings from my book, actually, that I have there as well. We have a conversation map that's actually the last chapter of my book that actually goes through here are some practical ways, practical questions you can ask. Like one of the most practical ones, Bob, is often when we start or have a relationship, and this is one of the key issues that people doubt or are hostile to Christianity, the first question we should ask is, can we disagree and still be friends? And that's a great question because it helps distinguish if this person is actually willing to have a thoughtful conversation, or if the conversation should be about what does friendship look like? Because I don't know anyone who has friends who agree with us 100% of the time, right? And so ultimately, if you want to learn more about the book, because we want you to take this resource and information. I love what you said about your ministry, Bob, that it's not about the person you're interviewing, it's about the kingdom work. We'd love to have this in the hands of as many people as possible to help them navigate through these very difficult waters.
Give us that website again.
Redeemingconversations.ca. And it's .ca because we're in Canada.
Okay. All right. You're not, what does COM stand for?
I
I
think it's
don't.
company.
Okay. All right. JoJo, thank you. I just want to let the folks who are listening and are viewing to know that you're listening to the kingdom and its stories. And in this broadcast, we try to interview people who can help us by their testimony and by their story to explore how we can better be Jesus' hands and feet in our own context. Jojo, tell us some stories that would help to illustrate, um, what the ministry God has called you to.
It's been such a powerful opportunity to speak about this. I will tell you, it is very difficult. I'm Asian, I'm Filipino, and we don't talk about sex and sexuality. Plus, I'm a pastor's kid, so there you go. These are the kinds of issues we avoid all the time. But the more I share my story, the more people come to me and say, "How can I get help?" Or what can I do? I remember at one youth conference I spoke at, everyone had left the room, and then one young man came to speak to me, and he said, I struggle with this too. I'm so grateful that I can talk to someone who understands and who's still a Christian and will help me maintain my faith. Another young woman, the same thing happened. The end of the presentation, only her dad was left because she was a pastor's kid too, and she actually said in front of her dad, who so it was a safe conversation. He was there to listen in. She said, "I'm so grateful. There's another pastor kid who understands what I'm going through. And I'm so grateful I can talk to you
Mm.
about that." Those are the most powerful things because we need to realize as the church, we're broken. All of us are broken. And the key line that I like to share is that in contrast to the revisionist view, Bob, that wants to revise the Bible to accommodate what we believe, our view, I call it the redemptive view. And you'll read more about that in the book because at the end of the day, God is redeeming us and has redeemed us, including every part of our body, including every part of who we are, because our sexuality has been confused. So, one key story was in 2019, I attended the largest gay Christian conference in Chicago. And I went there because they claimed to be Christians, and their whole theme was about sexuality and love. And I remember a Methodist bishop coming to the stage, and she said, "My sexuality, my lesbianism, and my Christian faith equally define who I am." And I realized there's something off with that. And here's the problem: we have to recognize our sexuality was affected by the fall, just like every other part of us. And so when we define ourselves as gay Christians or trans Christians, we're actually defining ourselves by our fallen nature, when in fact what Christ has given us when we are born again is a new identity. We have now a new identity in Christ because of his redemptive power. So another story from that same conference, Bob, was I went to that conference because of my book. I'm writing this book, and it's all about how we can love appropriately, love biblically. And the conference was about love. But here's the problem, Bob. Not one speaker that I heard from the main sessions or the breakout sessions actually defined the word love. It blew my mind. So the last breakout session I attended, I actually raised my hand at the end of it, and I'm a journalist by trade, so I'm like, "I'm sorry if I missed it, but I don't remember any of you defining what love is. Can you please do that?" And Bob, you should have seen them. They were like shocked for like 10 seconds or 20 seconds, as if I
Mm.
just dropped my pants, right? There's like they looked at me as a weird reaction. And one the first person's like, love is like puppies and kittens." Another person's like, "Love is, I can't describe it. It's like feeling you have when you walk down a hill and you're holding each other up." And I thought these are terrible answers, right? But here's the point, and this is why it just bothered me so much, and why this is in my book is not one of them said what First John 4 says: God is love. If we want to know what love is, we need to look at the character of Jesus, because Jesus loved people enough to cry with them or to overturn tables and call people whitewashed tombs. His motivation was always love. And that's what's missing with this discussion. That's what we need to be able to talk to people about these issues, Bob, is because we need to show what real love looks like. So one other story to really bring that out. I actually spoke at another church, and I spoke on gender confusion and gender identity. And at the end of the conversation, a young man came to me and said, "I disagree with everything you just spoke about." And I said, "Great, let's go out for coffee and talk about it." He actually said yes. And so we started meeting regularly. I actually just sent him a text to see if we can reconnect again. And he actually is transitioning, came from a very conservative Bible believing home, and is now transitioned to look female. And we kept arguing and disagreeing because he was one of those people that agreed that we can have these difficult conversations and still be friends at the end of the day, right? He's a person of peace. And I remember it was about our second meeting. We had a great conversation. We brought out our Bibles and everything, and it was very friendly though. And at the end of it, I said, "Hey, can I just pray for you?" And he said, "Sure." So I closed my eyes. I remember doing that and just praying for wisdom and grace for him and God's mercy, just for both of us, in fact. And when I opened my eyes, Bob, what happened was there was a woman at the other side. I mean, we were at a Starbucks, the other side of the Starbucks, and she stood up and she stomped towards our table. And my first thought is, where is the exits? Because I thought she was going to come and deck me, right? And so she came right to our table, and I was anticipating a left hook. And the only thing between me and her was this empty Starbucks cup, and I'm in trouble here. And she said, "You know, my partner is trans, and my child is transgender too." Then she said this. I just came here because I saw you praying for a transgender person, and you're the first Christian I've ever seen pray with a trans person, and I came here to thank you for being willing to do that. And
And
I
she
was so
stomped over the table
yeah,
and
and she
said
had,
that.
yeah, she stomped up to the table to thank me for praying for my friend. And I thought, and I said to her, I'm so sorry. Like, we should be the first people to pray with our transgender friends. We should be the first people to engage in these conversations again, because we have good news to share. And when we come off as hostile, we have to be careful that our corrective nature should be out of a motivation of love. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these issues. That's again why I'm writing this book, Bob, because I think there's a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of hurt that's going on both inside and outside the church. Because frankly, let's face it, the LGBTQ issue is the one the government here in Canada has been using to censor churches, to attack Christians, to fire Christians, and it's so hard to be able to engage. But remember, that's what love steps in. C.S. Lewis said, and this is the irony of it actually, Bob. When I was leading that Bible study group with the young man that I fell in love with, we were actually studying C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And in that book,
Wow.
Lewis defines love as seeking the best for the other person. And we understand that that's what love is because God gave us his best when he sent us Jesus. And so I realize if I truly love this young man, I need to offer him my best, and my best is my relationship with Christ. It wasn't me.
Right. Yeah. It seems to me, Jojo, and help me with this. It seems to me that sometimes, as human beings, we want to define reality and as what we want it to be rather than what it is. And I can see that someone with a same-sex attraction would want to define reality to saying that um, it's okay. It's because I want it to be this.
Right.
But that doesn't change what actually is.
No,
It seems to me that truth is what is, not what is not.
right. Well, I,
And
I
eh,
love this. Oh, sorry, Bob, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
I love this book by Greg Koukl, who's an apologist from California. And he wrote a book called The Story of Reality. And he says Christianity is the story of how reality actually is. And he says, if you're a Christian,
Mm,
reality is summarized around Jesus. But then he said this, if you're not a Christian, reality is still summarized around Jesus because there's only one reality and we can't escape it. So here's a little tip as well in terms of how I share this. And this has been so helpful to many of my Christian friends who struggle with same-sex attraction or gender confusion say this. For those of us who experience same-sex attraction, you need to recognize for in our minds, it's not same-sex attraction. And this is what I mean. Sexuality is about attracting the opposite, the difference, right? And we see that in nature, peacocks have tails, lions have manes, but the female versions don't have those things. In the same way, humans are sexually dimorphic. They're different. Males and females look different. But for those of us who experience same-sex attraction, we somehow, for some reasons, view members of the same sex, our own sex, as different from us. And if you see it that like there's a reason why lesbian couples there's often one that looks really feminine, one looks that really masculine, right? Even with male couples there's often an age gap, there's a racial gap, there's a physical body difference, right? And why is that? Because you're attracted to what you perceive as different. And the problem with that is they're
Hmm.
not different. That's the issue. It's a false view of self. Same-sex attraction starts with a false view of self. And part of healing means being able to say, no, that man is no different from me. It's actually another man made in God's image that I'm made as well, and I'm not different from him in any kind of way sexually. That's part of what the healing process is. And with transgenderism, is even another step, which is that not only do you perceive other men as different, you perceive yourself as the opposite gender. And so again, it's you're absolutely right, Bob. This starts with a false view of reality, starting with a false view of self, which is why when you have a Christian perspective, you realize, no, Christ is the center of reality, like Greg Koukl says. And the beautiful thing about that is reality is surrounded, is created by a God who loves us. That's why we need to enter reality. That's what I see as evangelism right now, Bob, actually. It's an invitation to a reality that consists, that is founded, that is made by a loving God. That's why we share our faith.
Amen. JoJo Ruba, thank you so much for being with us today. The Lord bless you. May He multiply you and your kind in His kingdom in this time. God bless you, JoJo. Thanks.